Hello, my name is Albert Mitchelson. My project is now known as the Mitchelson-Morley experiment. My experiment focused on attempting to measure how the ether would affect our world. Up until my experiment, the ether was considered to be the medium that light passed through to cross any distance. We were trying to prove the existence of the ether with our experiment. Due to the orbit and rotation of the Earth, the ether should have increased or decreased the speed of light when it reached the end of the experiment, relative to the speed of the original light source. The ether was proposed to exist throughout the universe and to have movement within it. Since the Earth is moving through the universe, there should have been ether winds, which would give the light more speed by going the same direction, or slow down the light by going the opposite direction. Now on to the actual process of the experiment, for which the setup for the experiment is also sometimes referred to as an interferometer, which you can see here. We set up two mirrors and a special piece of coated glass in a specific orientation from a light source, which should have revealed that light was going at different speed at the end where the detector was measuring the light. The experiment started with a single light source or beam directed at an angled coated piece of glass. This piece of glass allowed half of the light to pass straight through and reflected the other half of light 90 degrees upward from the original source. The glass was able to split the beam by being half-coated in silver. Now that there were two beams, each of them traveled towards different mirrors, which were equal distances from the glass that made the two beams. The mirrors were perpendicular to the two beams. The mirrors were able to rotate in a pool of liquid to increase accuracy and to ensure that they were in fact perpendicular to the beams of light. The two beams bounced off the mirrors directly back into the silver-coated piece of glass that had first separated them. The beams reached the glass at the same time and both traveled 90 degrees downward from the original beam. The final beam, which was coming from the glass, went into a measuring device that measured the wavelength and energy of the light. As an end result of the experiment, we were expecting the speed of light to have slowed down by the time the light reached the detector or changed in some way. We were expecting the ether to have impacted the energy at the end, but there was not any major energy difference, which ultimately implied that there was no ether. Or at the very least, the ether did not affect the one thing it was supposed to have traveled through it, light. The experiment was first actualized in Germany by myself in 1881. I repeated the experiment with collaboration in 1887 in America. With collaboration, the experiment increased in accuracy. The experiment continued to be repeated up until 1929, and we continued to get the same results where the speed of light did not change. Some other events happened around the same time as the experiments. Some were significant and others not so much. In 1881, the first time I performed the experiment, early prohibition was happening and the Red Cross was forming in America. In 1887, earmuffs were patented, and Sherlock Holmes made his way into his first of Conan Doyle's published stories. Only I worked on the experiment in 1881, but in 1887 I began performing the experiment with Edward Morley, an American chemist. I had moved to America at this point. My role in the project was initially proposing and performing the experiment, then working on a refined version of the experiment with Morley later. This experiment failing led to people deciding that there is no ether, but that there is instead a vacuum that light and matter have to travel through. The results of this experiment also factored into Albert Einstein's general relativity theory. My experiment was the start to establishing concretely that light is always constant. No, I am not frustrated with the failure of the experiment. Ultimately, it led to an understanding that the ether does not exist. My experiment essentially disproved exactly what I was trying to prove, but I think that's okay. That is what scientific progression is about. Also, this experiment led to me receiving the first Nobel Prize in physics, so that's cool too.